at a Hall of Famer. All right, so that's the number one thing for me. Number two is black agate next to their career. I want to see a Hall of Famer in a situation in his career. I want to see him lead the league in some categories. I want to see whatever those categories might be, even walks, stolen bases. I want to see some league leaders in that scenario. I don't want to see, a 20-year career and I have no black type, Harold Baines. I want to see some black type. I don't have to have 30 of them like I do with Garrick. I don't have to have 22 of them like I do with Mays, but I need to see some black type across a long body of work for a particular player. That is item number two. Item number three, and this is a little difficult because it's a vote, I'd like to see an MVP. Or Cy Young. When I look at the MVPs and the Cy Youngs, I want to see a guy's played 20 years or 18 years. You would think if he's eligible for the Hall of Fame and he's Hall of Fame worthy, that sometime in that 15, 18-year period, he was good enough in his league, not in the sport, in his league to win the Most Valuable Player award. You play 17 years in the Hall of Fame, in Major League Baseball, and then you get into the Hall of Fame. I like to think once out of that 17 years, you were considered the best pitcher or hitter in your league one time. Now, listen, if you got 8 second-place votes, it's a gray area here, but I like to see it once. That's number two. Or number three. I like to see you play well in big games. I know it's not fair for everybody. Ted Williams, for instance, had a bad World Series in 1946. Do I penalize him? He's a different category because he's a no doubt about it anyway. But, there are examples like that. But I'd like to see a performer play well, a player, a Hall of Famer play well in a big game. That's what, to me, pushed Schilling home. That one day will probably push Beltran home. I like to see you play well in the big game. And if you're a relief pitcher, I think the big game is most important because you can throw anybody out there to save 90% of the games. I have seen a lot of so-so relievers have big years because, again, 95% of the time when you take a lead in the ninth inning, you're going to win the game anyway, no matter who's pitching. So the regular season saves a little overrated. What you do with seasons on the line in postseason play, if, for instance, you're a relief pitcher, that to me is significant. And then number five, in this category, to me, you got to have some minimum qualification. Unless you're Sandy Koufax, who did it for 5 years, I'd like to see you be great for an 8-year period. I think 8 years, 8 Hall of Fame years to me is fair. Not 6, not 5.5, like a Mattingly, for whatever the reason with a bad back. I want 8 years. I want 8 years where I can circle going through their career and I see a Hall of Fame production, I see a Hall of Fame kind of season. That's what I want. Now, listen, if you're Sandy Koufax and you only have 5 of those years, but the years are so good, I'm going to have to live with it. Again, nothing is so cut and dried that I'm going to have to make some exceptions once in a while, but generally speaking, I want 8 years. That is a Hall of Fame scenario. Now, if you look at the players this year, I'm a small room guy, too. Hall of Fame is supposed to be for the great, not for the very good. The Hall of Fame in any sport, in any walk of life, is not supposed to be for the very good performers or the very good actors or the very or the very good basketball players or the very good football players. It's supposed to be for the great. Great is supposed to go along with Hall of Fame. And as far as I am concerned, in this year's ballot, I'm a small room guy. I'm only putting one guy in, and that is Kent. And Jeff Kent, to me, and for whatever the reason, doesn't get nearly as much love as he should. We've gone through this 1,000 times. But Kent's got all these scenarios that I like. Number one, he won an MVP. So that is number one. He won. He was the best player in his league in one particular season. He's got many more than 8 years. He's got 370 home runs. He hit 290 as a second baseman. He played well in big games. He won an MVP. Eye test I love. All right, I don't know how much black type he has because remember, he's doing it at second base, so the black type at that position is a little trickier. So I'm going to have to agree that maybe the black type for Kent's not there. But the eye test is, the MVP is, the big game is, and he certainly had 8, 9 years that I would consider Hall of Fame caliber years, whether they be with the Giants, the Astros, the Dodgers. He had 8 years of that. So to me, he's the only guy that fits the bill. The other other 5 or 6 guys on this ballot who everybody is preaching love for this year. You know, there's, listen, Beltran's going to make it 1 year. He's not going to make it this year because of the Astros sign stealing thing. He's going to have to sit a little while. That's going to be his punishment based on the fact that just occurred a couple of years ago with the penalties. So Beltran is going to make it. This year he's not. We throw him out. Roland did not have 8 years. Go look at his career. I've looked at it incessantly this week. I don't care about WAR. That's a man-made, that's a statistical data statistic that I have no interest in. I don't pay any attention to it. Ben Zobrist led Major League Baseball in WAR 1 year, and he is not a Hall of Famer. So I don't, and he wasn't a great player. So I don't pay any attention to WAR. Roland did not have 8 years. He did not win an MVP. He did not, by the eye test, he was a good player. He wasn't a great player. He doesn't have any black type by his name. Scott Rowland is not a Hall of Fame baseball player. Again, Hall of the very good. He's a very good player. He was an excellent defensive third baseman. He had Hall of Fame years, but he didn't hit the number 8. He is not a Hall of Fame player. Andrew Jones is not a Hall of Fame player. Number 1, he's a .254 lifetime hitter. Number 2, his career fell off the face of the earth from the age of 30 on. And number 3, I mean, if you go look at him, how many times has he sat there and blown you away with Hall of Fame years? He's got about 5 or 6. That's it. He's only got a couple black types by his name. Okay, you want to make him the greatest defensive center fielder in the history of baseball? Well, why isn't Ken Berry in the Hall of Fame? How about Devon White? They were better outfielders, and I saw both play. They were better than him. And I know he's great, but Devon White's the best defensive center fielder I've ever seen, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. And yes, I understand Jones hit a lot of home runs. He hit over 400. And yes, you know, he had 3 or 4 years of 100 RBIs, but I don't think Jones is a Hall of Fame center fielder. That's me. I would not vote him in. And he also never won an MVP. All right, Helton. Helton's problem to me is he can't get around the splits of Coors Field and the rest of his time in the sport. He played his whole career in Colorado. He's a .287 hitter away from Coors Field. He's like a .345 hitter in Colorado. He's got 147 home runs away from Coors Field. He's got like 240 in Coors Field. The RBIs are like 550 to 850. I'm sorry. I mean, with the splits, with that hitter's ballpark, that drastic, I can't put him in the Hall of Fame. He's a .287 hitter outside of Coors Field. Keith Hernandez is a better hitter than Helton is outside of Coors Field. And Keith is a much better defensive first baseman. And he won championships. And Keith can't get a sniff. So if I'm not going to put Helton in, who's 287 with 147 career home runs with 549 RBIs, that's his record away from Coors Field. Without I don't think he won an MVP, you know, with unbelievable numbers in his ballpark, but not so great outside of his ballpark. If you're putting him in, you better put Keith Hernandez in immediately, because Hernandez won an MVP, which Helton did not do. So that eliminates him from the consideration. And then Billy Wagner, who a lot of people are expressing love to. Listen, the thing about Billy Wagner is it's hard to an MVP from the reliever. It's not going to happen. Black type by his name, the strikeouts okay. Eye test, when he was on his game, he was as good as all can be. Had some years. He had a lot of saves. He's got a lot of things you like, but the thing for the relief pitcher that, to me, gets him destroyed, he's got an over 10 ERA in 14 lifetime postseason relief appearances. That I can't put a guy in. With the reliever, you have to be great. That's why I always had a problem with Lee Smith. I always had a problem with him. With the reliever, you have to be good in October. He wasn't. That's why he's not in. All right, that's where we are. Small room guy, Jeff Kent. Here's Alana. She is going to add her 2 cents. Miss Rizzo, good afternoon. How are you today? Go ahead.
I'm good. Good afternoon. I agree with you that I, too, am a small hall person. I disagree with you completely on Todd Helton. The reason being is, yes, he did not win an MVP, but you have to, I think the overshadowing sentiment that because he played the majority of his games in Coors Field is an unfair one, because you think about the amount of games he played away from Coors Field in the division that were primarily pitcher-friendly parks. Think about how difficult it used to be to hit, it still is difficult to hit in San Francisco. San Diego used to be a much more friendly pitcher's park than it is now. Dodger Stadium used to be a much more pitcher-friendly park than it is now. So yes, I understand 81 games a year away from Coors Field. I get that the outfield is gigantic. I get the, the altitude, the thin air, all of that stuff. but the majority of his games on the road were not in hitter-friendly parks. He didn't get an MVP, but he did have black types in 2000 when he led the league in batting average. He led the National League in OBP. He also led the National League in OBP in 2005. So I do think that Todd Helton, 17 years with the same team, came up clutch. One of your categories was you had to come up clutch in big games. He came up clutch in huge games. Game 2 of that doubleheader to get them to the postseason. Game 163 where he had the home run and the intentional walk before they ended up winning the game. To me, he comes up clutch in big games. One of the best left-handed hitters I've ever seen. To me, Todd Helton is a Hall of Famer. Now, small hall, I'm with you. This is my problem, I guess, with the Hall of Fame. I do believe that the Baseball Hall of Fame is the best out of all of the major sports because it is supposed to be the most difficult to get in. Everybody and their father gets into everybody gets into Canton, everybody gets in the NBA. Major League Baseball isn't that way, and I like that. I think if you are, in today's day and age, you have to be an absolutely exceptional offensive player, 500 or more home runs, 3,000 or more hits, or you have to be an unbelievably well-rounded everything type of player. Again, going back to the Todd Helton scenario, nobody is saying anything about Joey Votto playing in Cincinnati. That's a hitter-friendly park. No one's saying anything about anybody in Toronto. No one's saying anything about anybody in these other parks that are very hitter-friendly. If Todd Helton played in these other parks, perhaps this would not even be an issue. Here's my other thing, too. Brian Kenny said something on our show yesterday, and I will be the first to admit that Brian Kenny has paid way more attention into all of the details of who gets into the Hall of Fame than I have. But he said something that he would vote for certain people this year because next year the ballot's going to be more crowded. For me, either you're a Hall of Famer or you're not. I don't care. If you're a Hall of Famer in 2023, then you better be a Hall of Famer in 2020. You better be a Hall of Famer in 2025. I think there are too many committees, too many cooks in the kitchen deciding whether people get into the Hall of Fame. Here's an interesting fact for you, Chris. Of the 341 people already elected into Cooperstown, only 40% of the electees were actually elected by the writers. Almost 60.5% were elected into the hall. 206 individuals elected into the hall by the oversight committees. That's the Contemporary Baseball Era Players Committee, the Baseball Era Non-Players Committee, the Classic Baseball Era, the Veterans Committee, this committee, that committee. There's too many committees. There's too many people deciding with too many different characteristics, too many different categories as to who get in. If Todd Helton's good enough to be in this year, he's good enough to be in next